On this edition of the Correspondents, a brazen Taliban raid on an Afghan army base results in the massacre of hundreds of soldiers and the resignations of the country's top military officials. U.S. President Donald Trump hits the 100-day mark in office as health care, spending, and taxes loom large on the White House agenda. And World Immunization Week this year, marking the halfway point in a global campaign to provide better access to life-saving vaccines. Hello and welcome to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. 2 U.S. service members were killed in Afghanistan Wednesday during an operation against the Afghanistan-based Islamic State group in Nangarhar province in the eastern part of the country. The deaths follow a massive Taliban attack last week that killed hundreds of Afghan army soldiers at a mosque on an army base in the north of the country. The gunmen and suicide bombers were disguised as fellow Afghan soldiers. It's reported to be one of the deadliest attacks on an Afghan military base since the war started. And for the latest now on this deadly series of attacks in Afghanistan, we are joined on Skype from Islamabad by VOA journalist and war correspondent Ayaz Gul, and right here in Washington by VOA Afghan Service Special Projects Manager Ibrahim Nassar. I want to thank both of you gentlemen for joining us today. But Ayaz Gul, I'm going to talk to you first. So before we get to the Taliban attacks, Ayaz, what can you tell us about the Wednesday evening operation against Islamic State that apparently killed 2 American soldiers and injured 1? What kind of an operation was that? What were they targeting?
Well, there has been an Afghan army-led operation going on in this district or in this province of Afghanistan, which is eastern Nangarhar province. Mm-hmm. And the American Air Force has been providing air power to this operation. That's been going on for several weeks. And as part of that operation, and in clearing some areas on the ground, the U.S. personnel were actually assisting the Afghan special forces. And that's when they came under attack. I mean, we have been given very few details by the U.S. military, but what we understand that in that ambush, 2 American soldiers got killed and 1 was wounded.
So the fact that Americans are targeting Islamic State in that part of the country, does that mean that Daesh is gaining a foothold in Afghanistan, Ayaz?
Well, until recently, yes. They were quickly spreading their roots, especially in eastern Afghanistan. But, you know, this operation that I mentioned, ever since the Afghan security forces have started that operation with the help of American Air Force, they have significantly reduced the number of their fighters. Mm-hmm. And, you know, let me tell you that Daesh or Islamic State does not face only attacks from the U.S. military and Afghan forces, but it is also facing attacks by the Taliban, because Taliban really does not want them to create problems for them on the battlefield, because they really have a serious rivalry between the two of them. And so Daesh or Islamic State is really finding it difficult to expand beyond certain eastern districts of Afghanistan.
That aspect of the rivalry is interesting, but first I want to get to Ibrahim. Of course, the big story was that major assault by the Taliban at that Afghan army base. How does something like that happen in what we assume has to be a major Afghan fortification? How does that happen?
I think I would call this complacency of the Afghan security forces. They have taken soft targets as something beyond attacks by the Taliban. But Taliban have been attacking soft targets. I mean, this happened inside a mosque. Actually, it was a prayer time, so they were letting people even, if these people have been war ready, I mean, they were dressed as Afghan soldiers. They went in an Afghan military vehicle, and they were let in because they were supposed to go to a mosque inside that base, so people could go inside.
So they did not know that they were armed? They did not know what their intentions were?
They didn't know that they were Taliban. They thought they were ordinary soldiers who were going inside to that military base, to a mosque for prayer. So they went inside, I mean, they killed people in the mosque and also in their cafeteria. But Taliban have attacked soft targets before that. I mean, just recently they attacked the largest hospital inside Kabul. I mean, they killed doctors, nurses, and patients. So Taliban are people who are terrorizing people just to show that Afghanistan is unstable. There can't be any stable government, and areas are out of reach of Afghan government. So that's the kind of strategy they're moving forward. And I would also call this big intelligence failure than military failure. It was the responsibility of intelligence, I mean, to tell the Afghan security forces if insurgents could go because they don't have bases inside Afghanistan.
So as a result, there have been already a number of resignations. So essentially, some army officials are basically taking responsibility for that failure.
I think this is something that positive after this incident happened, that the top officials are taking responsibility. The defense ministers and also the Afghan military chief resigned from their posts, and they've been replaced recently by.
Okay, and Ayaz, I'm wondering, could the Taliban attack earlier this week be a type of retaliation for that massive bomb that was dropped by the U.S. military 2 weeks ago, the one they call the mother of all bombs?
Well, if you read the Afghan newspapers and watch the primetime talk shows, that's what even Afghan analysts in Kabul are suggesting, that the Taliban attack was basically a retaliation to send a message to the American military that if they will use these kind of bombs, then they are prepared to undertake these kind of massive attacks. And I think we are going to see quite a bloody fighting season with these kind of activities. If the U.S. military is prepared to use these kind of massive weapons, and the Taliban are going to kill people indiscriminately the way they did last week, this is going to be a tough fighting year for both the sides. And that's, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, when he was in Kabul earlier this week, he also warned that this will be a tough year for even Afghan security forces.
Ibrahim, have we heard reaction from the Afghanistan government to U.S. deployment of this MOAB bomb? I mean, this has never been used before by the U.S. military, and of course, Afghanistan seems to be the most obvious choice all of a sudden. Are people upset about this?
No, people are, I would say, not upset. I mean, the government has welcomed it. Even the ambassador, Afghan ambassador in the United States, welcomed this, saying it killed a large number of Daesh or ISIS militants and even their leaders. And some of them were from other countries, including India, Pakistan, and I guess Uzbekistan. So they are saying, I mean, we need force against insurgents, be that Taliban, be that ISIS. And local people also have welcomed this. People who have suffered in the Achin district of Ningar province, they say, well, it didn't do any civilian casualties, so they are sick and tired of Daesh in that area. But I personally say force might be needed, but it's not the solution. There should be other efforts to bring people together and also take out the sanctuaries of militant groups outside Afghanistan. So this is what the Afghan government and the former Afghan government has been saying, that, and Afghan analysts, if you talk to them, so the war in Afghanistan cannot be won unless sanctuaries provided by other countries outside Afghanistan to militants are taken out.
Ayaz, getting back to the Taliban attack, what does it tell you about Afghan security procedures? Are changes now likely as a result of what happened there?
Well, as you know, today the Taliban formally launched its so-called spring offensive across Afghanistan. And this attack, came at a time when the Taliban were really overrunning districts in rural parts of Afghanistan. And right now they are in control of, if you go by the U.S. military assessment, 10% of the territory is under the control of the Taliban and 25% is contested, where either it is in the control of the Taliban or under their influence. So if you keep that in mind, it's a huge territory, and that shows the Afghan government will really find it difficult to maintain or to bring security to these areas during this fighting season. So the security situation is quite, is deteriorating and has a challenging situation.
I'm out of time, but can you tell me if this is affecting morale within the Afghan army very quickly?
Well, obviously, these number of people killed in one attack, obviously
that's got to hurt, right? Thank you for your reporting. Ayaz Gul and Ibrahim Nassar, we appreciate you helping us out here. We're taking a short break now, but when we come back, Donald Trump is marking his first 100 days as president. What has he accomplished and what future battles are in store for the new administration? This is The Correspondents on Voice of America.
Health news and notes. This is Living Better.
In his native Somalia, Abdikadir Adam watched neighbors injured by bomb blasts bleed to death en route to the hospital. So, with his life savings, he bought and built his own ambulance.
First ambulance I paid, I remember the only money I was having, 4,200 I paid. And well, my family was telling me to stop this job.
10 years later, with help from donors, that single van has grown into a fleet called Amin Ambulances, Somalia's only free ambulance service. Beyond the violence, Somalia also faces severe drought, and the lack of basic services puts many at risk.
We are not dealing only the explosions, but also we deal with pregnant women. We took the children who's in diarrhea.
Adam says his dream is to reach all of Somalia with emergency transportation, adding helicopter support to his fleet to get people to help even faster. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
Welcome back to The Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Milar Sega in Washington. Well, the U.S. Congress has been working feverishly this week on a budget agreement to keep the government running and avert a partial government shutdown. The debate over legislative priorities comes as President Donald Trump marks his 100 days in office, still looking for congressional approval on one of his biggest campaign promises. VOA's congressional reporter Katherine Gibson has our report.
What follows is my 100-day action plan to make America great again.
As President Trump looks to the budget battle for a win on his biggest campaign promise, funding the 3,200-kilometer border wall with Mexico.
We're building the wall. In fact, it's going to start soon, way ahead of schedule.
But with a price tag in the billions, a border wall will be a tough sell for Republicans and a rallying point for opposition Democrats. And no one is sure if funding for the wall will be a deal breaker for President Trump or just the first step towards a compromise in the form of more immigration funding. Headed in negotiations Monday, the White House was careful not to say.
But I'm not going to start to take things on and off the table with respect to what the president may or may not do.
But memories of the failed effort on health care are still fresh for Republicans, creating more pressure inside the party.
President Trump is not a creature of Washington. He's not someone with a lot of legislative deal-making experience. And so we're sort of seeing this play out on this funding fight.
So, is President Trump on track to make America great again? To help us out with that, we are joined in Washington by VOA White House correspondent Pete Heinlein. Welcome back, Pete.
Thank you.
And VOA congressional correspondent Katherine Gibson, who filed that report for us. It's great to have you both. So, Katherine, I'm going to talk to you first, since you've been covering this candidate Trump even well before he became president.
Right.
How does his actual campaign rhetoric match with what he has done so far at the White House?
Well, if you talk to the Trump voters, as I did in this past election year, a couple of key campaign promises stood out for them. The big one was filling that Supreme Court vacancy, because that's the thing that will have a lasting impact.
So he chalks one up there.
Exactly.
Okay.
He's got that spot filled. Then there's a bigger, more nebulous campaign promise, that Make America Great Again line, which for a lot of voters across the country meant a lot of different things. In some ways, it meant border security, ending illegal immigration. For others, it meant repealing and replacing Obamacare. And in terms of that key campaign promise, we've had a little bit of a rocky start up on Capitol Hill.
Repeal and replace Obamacare on day one, getting rid of Islamic State, not a problem. We've got a secret plan to take care of that. But Pete, clearly there is a difference between what a candidate says on the campaign trail and what he actually does once he's at the White House. Does his 100-day mark mean anything? Is it an artificial construct?
It is an artificial construct, absolutely. And President Trump himself the other day said, it's a lot bigger than everybody's making it. Everybody wants to weigh in and give their opinion on how things are going. But certainly what he said on the campaign trail is a bit different in many respects.
See, part of the reason why I think we make a big deal out of this 100 days is because it's President Trump himself saying at the first 100 days, we're going to win so much, your head's going to spin.
And
right?
he said on the campaign trail, we're going to declare China a currency manipulator. Now that's all gone. He says, no, we don't want to call China a currency manipulator. They're helping us with North Korea, which is a much bigger fish to fry on his foreign policy.
Catherine, I'm wondering, do you agree with that assessment that the 100 days doesn't really matter?
Well, if you look at it from a Capitol Hill perspective, if you look at the bills that have been introduced so far, President Trump had a 100-day contract with the American voter where he promised to drain the swamp, where he promised to bring in big infrastructure spending, get funding for the border wall, repeal and replace Obamacare. And if you look at all of those key campaign promises, not a one has been fulfilled yet.
Pete, President Trump has no legislative accomplishments to speak of. What has he accomplished, though, in the first 100 days?
He has laid down this strategic, lack of strategic patience on North Korea. He has said he doesn't want to have a ground war in Syria after attacking in response to the Syrian chemical weapons attack. So he has a couple things that he can call accomplishments in the foreign policy arena.
Now, to be fair to what Pete Heinlein has to say, the president has had to deal with some pretty weighty issues. I mean, there's Syria, and of course, right now, ratcheting up North Korea.
Right, and coming out of that classified all-members briefing on Capitol Hill, many of the members I spoke to said that it was a very good briefing and that they felt that the president's team really had a handle on getting tough with North Korea, putting those sanctions in place, putting financial pressure, and working with China to try and solve this issue. So it looks like, at least on that front, members on Capitol Hill were happy with the president's approach.
I'm wondering a question to both of you. How badly has the Russia probe hurt the president's ability to get things done?
You know, that's really where the legislative accomplishments come in. If we don't have legislative accomplishments to cover on Capitol Hill, if we don't have bills and new legislation being introduced, then the attention turns to other issues up on Capitol Hill. And so far, that's been the Russia probe. That's been Devin Nunes headed to the White House, briefing the president on what he's found out. That's certainly sucked up a lot of air on Capitol Hill. And I'm sure it did at the White House as well.
Your thoughts on that, Pete?
That drip, drip, drip every day, a new revelation has distracted President Trump and his administration from their other agendas, and it's beginning to take its toll.
Michael Flynn has been in the news. Apparently, more evidence that he broke the law by not reporting some of his payments that he received from foreign agents. What's the likelihood of something like that sticking to the president? Is the president able to sort of divorce himself completely from a character like Michael Flynn, who he praised to high heaven early on in the campaign?
I don't think so. He's hoping he can. He's trying to divert attention away. But
what do you think, Catherine?
I think that this constant, as Pete said, the drip drip, where you have a bipartisan consensus. You had both the Republican and the Democratic heads of the top oversight committee coming out and saying that Flynn was the subject of a Pentagon probe. That's not going to go away, even though Sean Spicer comes out at the briefings and says, you know, hey, all of this was done under the Obama administration. His security clearance was done under Obama. He's not part of our administration anymore. This is not really an issue. I think, you know, that might be a little bit of wishful thinking.
Pete, in an interview with Reuters, President Trump said the United States possibly could be involved in a major confrontation with North Korea. Should something like that, a statement like that, worry Americans?
I think it's definitely a cause for worry. President Obama told President Trump, as the two were exchanging presidencies on January 20th, that was the big issue. Secretary of State Tillerson is before the UN Security Council at this very moment, outlining American policy and trying to line up international support on just that subject.
Okay, I've already been told to wrap up, but very quickly from both of you, let's go back to grade school. If you had to put a grade on President Trump's first 100 days, how would you grade him?
From Capitol Hill?
Not very high.
B?
C is average.
C? Ooh. I would say so.
We would say average?
We don't have any. We haven't
Some
passed any bills.
would say much lower. What about you, Pete?
The critics are saying F on foreign policy, but he does
have somebody who watches him. covers him on a daily basis?
He's making progress on the foreign policy front.
Bills take a long time.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Let's give the president some time to take care of that stuff. Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you, Pete. We're going to take another break now, but when we come back, this is World Immunization Week. More on the international campaign to bring life-saving vaccines when we come back. But first, a reminder, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, and comments on our Facebook page. The address is VOA The Correspondents. We'll be right back.
From science and technology, here's what's new.
It's a fully electric aircraft, and once in the air, it's like flying a big drone. It's the Kitty Hawk Flyer, an amphibious personal multicopter funded by Google's Larry Page that weighs about 100 kilograms with 8 rotors and 2 large landing pontoons. It's the 8 rotors that make it a multicopter instead of a helicopter. The Kitty Hawk people say their aircraft is tested, safe, and legal in the United States to fly over uncongested waters under certain U.S. Federal Aviation Administration restrictions. The pilot navigates with a touchscreen and 2 stick controllers. The flyer travels at up to 40 kilometers per hour and a maximum of 4.5 meters above the water. They say you don't need a pilot's license and can learn to fly the Kitty Hawk in minutes. They're saying that, not me. The Kitty Hawk Flyer is still in prototype stage. The final version is supposed to be out for sale at the end of this year. No price has been announced. For VOA's What's New, I'm Todd Grossharms.
And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Millar Sega in Washington. Well, this year marks the halfway point in the worldwide campaign to provide children and adults the best information and the greatest access to life-saving vaccines. Our health reporter Carol Pearson takes a look at the progress the medical community has made and what's at stake. Let's have a listen.
2, 3. Good job. Good job.
The goal is to prevent millions of people from getting vaccine-preventable diseases by the year 2020.
Can you take a deep breath?
No.
No? Okay.
The plan is to provide universal access to vaccines to protect people of all ages, from the very young to the very old. The World Health Organization wants people everywhere to know that vaccines work.
First, to say that immunization and vaccines are the most powerful public health tool that we have.
Dr. Flavia Bustreo says 35 years ago, 13 million children lost their lives from diseases that could be prevented by vaccines. That number has been reduced to 6 million, but that's still too many. Today, 85% of children are vaccinated against measles and other deadly diseases, but that number has to get even higher.
We need in a population to have a vaccination coverage that is above 90% in order to have what we call the herd effect.
The herd effect. To tell us what the herd effect actually means and why it's important, I'm joined here in Washington by VOA's health reporter, Carol Pearson. It's so good to have you back, Carol. We haven't had you on for several weeks, so I suspect it's because we haven't had any major epidemic that's been making the rounds. So let me ask you about Dr. Bustreo's comments. I mean, she seems to be talking about people as if we're herds of cows or something. Should we be insulted? What is the herd effect?
No. If there are 26 vaccines that protect you against infectious diseases, and so the herd effect that she's talking about are the most. It's a protection against diseases that are the most infectious.
So in other words, the more people who are protected or vaccinated, the safer the herd.
Yes.
Talking about the population.
Right, and you have to have it about 90 to 95% to get protected against some of these diseases, such as measles, for example. Okay. Measles, everybody, and I talk to people who don't believe in vaccines, who don't want them for their children, who haven't had their children vaccinated, and what they say is that they are fearful about these vaccines. They're afraid the vaccines can actually give the children diseases. So I talked to a number of other experts besides Dr. Bustreo, and they say the vaccines are now very, very pure, that there is nothing, they even took out preservatives that did not have any negative effect on children. And there is nothing in these vaccines that will ever give a child the disease. Now, what they've done since 1985, polio used to strike about 350,000 children a year. And that's down to something like last year was 37.
Right.
That's a huge drop.
No, it is. And that's a wonderful success rate. But I wonder, Carol, why such a persistent belief among some anti-vaxxers that vaccinations have a direct link to autism? Is there any evidence to point in that direction?
There is no evidence, and studies have been done by the U.S., by the CDC, by health agencies in the United Kingdom, in Italy. You know, there's been numerous studies done, and there is no link. Autism is something that happens within the first couple of months after pregnancy.
So obviously it's an alternative fact. How does an alternative fact like that gain so much traction among celebrities, among so many people that you talk to on the street? There are many parents, as you know, who refuse to have their children vaccinated.
Yes.
Where did they get this evidence from?
Well, there was a doctor, Andrew Wakefield, whose medical license has been revoked. He is British. He now lives in Texas, and he has produced a film called Vaxxed, which is about the harms of vaccinations.
And that sort of led to this groundswell.
Yes, it did, because his study was published in Lancet.
I see.
And which is a British medical.
But that study has since been debunked, correct?
Yes, it has, but the myth has not gone away. And that's the problem, because if you look for harms of vaccines on the website, or on, you put it in a browser, you will come up with people who say that their child has been harmed by vaccines, because not necessarily autism, but maybe allergies. The other thing is that the children get a lot of vaccinations in the first couple of years of life, and that's when you're going to see autism.
So what would Dr. Bustreo tell a mother who refuses to take her child for vaccinations? What would she tell her?
First of all, you have to respect these people. They want the best for their child. And Dr. Bustreo, who is in charge of maternal, infant, and child health, she's the assistant director at the World Health Organization. She certainly is very passionate about health for children. And so what they would want to do is talk about, what are your fears? Is there something in a vaccine that makes you very concerned? Do you want to space out the vaccines? Most doctors say no, but that it's meant to be given at the time before children can get these diseases, but they are willing to work with parents to allay any fears. That's why thimerosal was taken out, a preservative from vaccines.
I want to ask you about this, because I got involved in a bit of an argument with another parent who basically said, I don't even take the flu shot because every time I take the flu shot, I get sick. I mean, again, is that a myth that we're talking about here? Why is that myth so prevalent in what you would think is a modern, scientifically based society?
Right, and it is the science. And I talked to one scientist who said what scientists have to do is get out and talk to people. The myth, I don't know why the flu shot seems to be such a myth, but the CDC, it's interesting, they did a study in the US of the people who died from the flu, and they were in the age bracket of about 24 to 64. So basically, after children had passed through their parents', this was a couple of years ago, their parents' health care to when they could get covered by Medicare, which is for older people.
So Carol, we got 30 seconds. How would you say this campaign has been going? How effective has it been?
The anti-vaccine machine?
World Immunization Week.
World Immunization Week is to get people to talk about immunizations.
Like
we are, and to get people to get their questions answered about whatever questions they happen to have about vaccinations, the safety, the need, and a lot of people don't have all that information.
Carol Pearson, I thank you very much for getting that message across to our viewers. Thank you, Carol, and to all of our correspondents today. That's all the time we have, but I hope you'll join us again next week for another edition of The Correspondents. Meantime, stay up to date with the latest world news. Just go to voanews.com. You can also check out all of our shows there by clicking the Watch tab. We're also on Facebook and YouTube at VOA The Correspondents. I'm Mil Arcega. Thank you for watching, and for now, so long from Washington.